We've all seen the headlines. The University of Nebraska system is currently facing a $58 million budget shortfall.
To help understand where we are today, we're taking a look back because this budget shortfall didn't happen overnight.
To start, a quick course on how the University of Nebraska is funded, because we're talking about a lot of money.
So the university is about a $3.3 billion enterprise. Obviously, we do teaching and research and outreach, but we operate 4 small municipalities. We have police officers and power plants and dining halls and dormitories and hospitals and sports team. You name it, we cover it all. So when you think about a $3.3 billion enterprise, it's a lot of money.
To simplify, we're going to break funding down into 3 main sources that generate roughly about $1 billion each. The first billion comes from tuition. There are currently close to 49,500 students enrolled across all campuses. And funding from the state. These are funds the legislature provides from our tax dollars. The next billion, programs at the university that generate money. And this is a long list, starting with Husker Athletics.
We are blessed in Nebraska to have one of a few self-supporting athletic programs across the entire country.
But there's also
parking garages, dining halls, residence halls, which are today more like apartments, and those all have to be self-sustaining.
And finally, the last $1 billion chunk comes from federal research grants and donor support. What's interesting here, these funds are typically restricted, meaning they can only be spent on certain things.
So if we get a grant to do wheat research, we have to use it to fulfill that contract. We can't use it to go pay, the lights or the president's salary or things like that.
Even a majority of donors specify how they want their donations spent.
If they want their funds to go to a particular facility project that we're working on, or perhaps a scholarship for a student in a particular field, or an endowed professor in a particular discipline. And so those dollars, 99% typically of the private dollars that we get from donors are restricted in nature.
So these funds are restricted and can only be spent in a certain way. These dollars are from self-funded programs, so the money they make goes right back into those programs. And going back to that first column, that's the general fund. We're talking tuition and state dollars. And here's where we're going to take a quick timeout.
Define terms to harmonize provisions.
How does the legislature decide how much of our tax dollars should go to the University of Nebraska? For insight into the process, let's bring in Nebraska's longest-serving governor.
How are you?
Dave Heineman to explain.
Well, when we do our 2-year biennial budget at the state level, the University of Nebraska and all state agencies are required to submit their budget request by about the middle of September.
So from September to January, the governor goes over the budget.
And then I can remember basically as governor, you spend all of December almost every day, 5, 6, 7 hours a day with your budget staff going over line item by line item.
Then the legislature looks over the budget for the next couple of months.
They pass a budget ultimately, usually in late April, early May. Now, generally speaking, the legislature's probably going to follow pretty much the governor's guidelines. And historically, 97 to 98% of what the governor recommends is what the legislature will pass.
Worth noting, a 1970s landmark lawsuit, Governor Exon versus the Nebraska Board of Regents, where the Nebraska Supreme Court ruled
that the legislature and the governor cannot decide ultimately how the University of Nebraska spends its money. They can send over as much state funding or as little as they want, but how it gets spent is up to the Board of Regents.
Did you see this budget shortfall coming?
Well, you could start to see that we're starting to lose students.
Fewer high school graduates are enrolling at the University of Nebraska, which brings us to where we are today, a $58 million budget shortfall, a direct result of declining enrollment. The university is taking in less tuition dollars at a time when costs are going up.
everything's more expensive today.
Once again, to keep the math simple, let's say tuition is around $10,000 a student. So even a loss of 25 students is $250,000.
Not too long ago, we were just about 53,000 students, and now we're down to 50,000. So that's a lot of dollars.
So that brings us to the question of why. Why is the University of Nebraska losing students? Is this just a Nebraska problem, or are other schools in the Big Ten or MIAA experiencing similar issues? We're going to take a look at that tomorrow at 10.